We are standing by for Ross Rice, who is a former member of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'm told we have him. Thank you for joining us, sir. Again, I just mentioned the raid of the FBI, by the FBI of Ed Burke's office back in 2018. I was speaking with our former political editor, Mike Flannery, about that raid and how significant that was. So, Ross, can you kind of walk us back, or take us back to that raid in November of 2018 and the type of evidence needed to raid a Chicago alderman's office?
Well, the search warrant that was executed at his office in 2018 was really the end of the investigation. It started back in 2014 when Alderman Solis was first contacted by the agents, and he agreed to cooperate. And everything that happened over the ensuing 4 years led to the eventual indictment of the alderman and his conviction today. That search was just the culmination of an investigation. What I'm sure the jurors would admit is it was the defendant's own words in his own voice that convinced him of his guilt. And as I've mentioned before, when we've talked about other cases like this in the federal system, there's no better evidence that a prosecutor can present to a jury than the defendant's own words when they don't think they're being recorded or no one else is listening. And that's exactly what happened here today.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that wiretap, and let's talk about Danny Solis's role in this, and from what you've been able to glean from it. And we understand that the feds are going to be able to use that in at least perhaps part of it in their case against arguably the most powerful politician in the state of Illinois, and that is Mike Madigan. And talk a little bit about the weight of that wiretap, if you would.
Well, it wasn't just the wiretap or the electronic surveillance. It was the recordings, the personal recordings that Solis made on behalf of the government. So you have two different aspects here, but it all leads to the same thing. You're getting Alderman Burke's own words in his own voice. I think as far as the Madigan trial goes, this was a test case. And I'm sure his attorneys were going to look and were anxious to see how this was going to play out in front of a jury. Guilty on 13 of 14 counts, I think that's a resounding victory for the government. And it's going to send a message that Solis isn't the central issue here. It's the defendant in each case and their own words as they're speaking unbeknownst to anyone else. Okay,
so that said, were you at all surprised, I guess, by his demeanor in we've played some of excerpts from these recordings. Anything stand out in your mind with regard to Ed Burke's, his demeanor, how he conducted himself in his day-to-day dealings with these individuals that were involved in the case against him?
Well, I think it's clear from the recordings that he was much more at ease and much more candid when he was conversing with Alderman Solis than when he was talking to other people. He was aware of investigative techniques that have been used by the government in other cases. I think he did his best to try and insulate himself using third parties, using assistants, but it was his misplaced confidence in trusting Alderman Solis, who was a willing co-conspirator in a lot of these cases, and was of great assistance to Alderman Burke in trying to go forward with these extortion plans.
I've dealt with federal prosecutors over the course of my career in the past, and my understanding is they don't go to court unless they know that they have their man or their woman. These charges, these counts, 13 of 14 guilty verdicts, are they, in your mind, how solid was the government's case going in?
Well, based on the recordings that we heard, and a lot of them weren't public until they were played in court, but based on the affidavit that was filed as part of the search, based on the charges contained in the indictment, and then based on the excerpts of the different recorded conversations that were played in court, I think they had a very solid case, and I'm not surprised that it's guilty out of 13 of 14. And I'm not surprised that they came back with that verdict as quickly as they did. To me, the evidence was overwhelming. And the defense really didn't put on much of a case. They tried to make it about Alderman Solis and his conduct, but that wasn't the issue here. It was what Alderman Burke had done. And I think people are no longer buying what's considered politics as usual. I think those days, hopefully, are coming to an end.
What now? Can you expand on that? What do you mean by that?
Well, here you have an alderman in the City Council of Chicago who has a side business as a lawyer doing tax appeal work for people and for issues that are potentially under his purview and control. That's an obvious conflict of interest. I was talking to a colleague today who's an attorney in private practice, and he made the same comment. How is it that someone in an elected capacity like that is able to have a private business, although they're a licensed attorney, doing this type of work? It's an obvious conflict of interest, and it's just going to lead to the type of conduct that we saw charged in the indictment returned earlier this year.
With regard to Solis, when you are an informant for the government, a mole for lack of a better word, and you help the government to land a fish as big as Ed Burke and potentially as big as Mike Madigan, how does that bode for you going forward with the charges that you're facing?
Well, as I understand it, he's already entered into a plea agreement with the prosecution, with the government, for his role in this case and the conduct he was involved in back in 2014 and 2013, even before he was contacted. So he did, in my mind, what was best for him. He admitted his guilt, and for reasons which are obviously self-serving, he decided to cooperate, and that's what the government needs. Alderman Burke wasn't engaging in conduct with strangers. He was engaging in conduct that was illegal with a fellow alderman who was essentially helping him in this illegal activities.
We're going to be hearing from prosecutors shortly, I am told. I mentioned Mike Madigan, and this is, again, the wiretap was so central to the case against Ed Burke. When you have a situation where there is crossover, you kind of mentioned it, it's sort of a precursor to that trial. Might we see a similar argument from prosecutors in the Mike Madigan with regard to the Solis wiretap that we saw in the Burke trial, as far as, I'm muddling the question. I guess what I'm asking is, when the government uses a wiretap against one defendant, are there any rules when it comes to using it against a second defendant?
Well, they're not going to be using the same conversations. Obviously, there's different crimes that are alleged to have been committed, and there's different evidence supporting those charges. But I think what you're alluding to here and what the prosecution is happy to see is that the jury gave a great deal of credibility to the recorded conversations. There was no doubt in their mind what Alderman Burke was alluding to, what he was trying to commit. And I think it's a good litmus test for them going forward with the trial set, I guess it is for April, of former Speaker Madigan. It's the same witness, the same type of recordings, just relating to different crimes.
Any thoughts with regard to sentencing, given his age, given the weight of the counts against him?
Well, that's going to be up to the judge ultimately, and she's going to have to balance the charges that he was convicted of and the potential sentences that go along with those charges. Ultimately, he's going to be sentenced based on the federal sentencing guidelines. And there's a lot that the alderman can do, the former alderman can do between now and sentencing to mitigate the potential sentence and lessen the penalties. And I'm sure she's going to take into account his age. But ultimately, he is going to have to serve some time here, I'm sure.